how did you go from this being an idea to then actually executing it and building a business around this?
If I would have had my time again, I would have made all those mistakes over again, because at the time I thought it was the right thing. It's not for everybody, and you have to make unpalatable decisions and lots of decisions, like all the time.
How did you go about building your team and building the culture that then supports the system, the structure, and the work that you're bringing forth to your clients?
I almost feel like I'm not qualified to give other leaders advice, but I think, having the gut feel and actually doing things that intuitively feel right.
Welcome back to CEO Behind the Scenes. I'm Lara Nassessian, and today I'm joined by Marcus Zeltzer, co-founder and managing director of Yellow Canary. From spotting a gap in the market to building one of Australia's most disruptive compliance solutions, Marcus has led Yellow Canary's growth from a startup in Sydney to a trusted partner for businesses navigating the complexities of payroll, risk, and automation. What I found so interesting about this conversation with Marcus was his unique perspective to challenge the status quo when it comes to payroll compliance, surviving early stage chaos, and harnessing the power of AI to build trust and transparency in the workplace. Marcus, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. And as I was doing my research and homework for this episode, one of the things that really struck me was the fact that you've really made quite the name of yourself by disrupting the big four accounting firms. And I really want to start this episode there.
Right.
I want to know from your perspective, what gave you the confidence and the conviction to do that, and why you felt like payroll was the system that needed a bit of a shake-up?
It's an interesting one because I think it's like the frog in the pot. I don't think you set out to change the world overnight. It's a game of inches, and you find yourself where we've found ourselves, but it's a 9-year overnight success story. So we didn't really set out to do for any grand plans. What we saw was like a really inefficient business practice, and we wanted to build some automation technology to solve that problem. Why payroll? It's really easy to sort of construct a really coherent narrative. You look at it and you think, oh, it's a pretty small industry. But if you like globally, payments to employees is 50% of GDP. We just saw it as a mission critical area, but we saw a lot of headlines. We're talking about 2016. We're talking about 7-Eleven and Michael Hill and George Columbaris and some of the early headlines. It just all pointed towards this becoming an issue, and an issue that hits people's hip pocket. So that's why we chose payroll. From
hearing that to then actually creating a business around it, could you talk us through that journey? How did you go from this being an idea to then actually executing it and building a business around this?
It's an idea I had in the shower one day, and my water bills are exorbitant because that's where I find that I do my best thinking. And so I actually started with a spreadsheet. I do have a computer science degree. I've just never used it in work. I just did it at university because I was interested. So I literally built the first version of the platform, which my co-founder Brenton refers to as the version -1, was a spreadsheet. And so I looked at, what is this award thing? How do people get paid? What's a penalty rate? What's a shift worker? And I just started reading as many awards as possible. So I built it in a spreadsheet. I put together a PowerPoint presentation, and I wandered around to all the big employers that were willing to take a meeting with me to sell them my platform. I was offering a upfront license fee with the view that I'd take that money and use the money to actually build the actual software. So there was a lot of ideation at the start, a lot of just playing around with different things, a lot of conversations, just trying to understand, because I don't have a payroll background. I don't have an employment law background. I don't have an industrial relations background. As coming as an outsider, we had to really learn quickly. Thankfully, nobody accepted my license in advance offer, which was too good to be true. And Brenton joined a year after I started, and he's been my friend for 25 years. We met on our first day of uni, and we actually both did the same degree, but he's actually a software engineer, unlike me, who just has the degree. So Brenton went about building the first version of the platform. We couldn't land a deal because in those days the attitude was still, I don't want to know if I have a problem, because if I find out, then I'm going to have to do something. So we did, the only work we could find was working for insurance companies, doing Fair Work compliance notice responses. So the way it worked was an employer would get a notice from the ombudsman saying that they needed to do an audit. They'd take that to their insurer. The insurer would go and appoint a panel lawyer and appoint us. And we just did anything that came through the door. So we were doing $3,000 audits, the sort of stuff that we would do now for a couple of $100,000, we would do for $10,000. But we got to know the subject matter really quickly. And we worked with a lot of different awards. We worked with every payroll system under the sun. And that was probably the first 40 or 50 jobs we did, were these little insurance jobs that we did along the way.
Yeah, that's such a great story. And I just got such a visual then of the two of you really starting this business from the ground up and being willing and audacious enough to go to these different businesses and position yourself and your services, despite the fact that there were these, big four accounting firms that were really dominating those types of the nature of these work, the underpayment issues that were happening at the time.
Yeah.
So could you paint this picture, if we were to go all the way back to the early stages of your startup journey? What was that like when you were getting these smaller jobs in? What was that environment like? Did you have like a big vision and a big plan as to where this was all going to go? Or what was that experience like for you?
It was a fight for survival. That was the first time I'd remortgaged the family home to fund this business. I went on to do it 3 times throughout the journey. So it was the most enjoyable part of the journey so far, because it was just the two of us. We were learning every day. The largest contract that we'd won in the early days went bad and we didn't get paid. And the client phoenixed their business rather to get out of back paying staff and paying our bill. So as the start of 2020, Brenton and I had just had enough and we decided we were going to give up. And we went for an emergency capital raise on the 11th of March, 2020, which was the day that the COVID lockdowns were put in place. We survived on JobKeeper through that period because we didn't have any work and we'd given up. And then, we won a little project, we won a bigger one, and then it just all snowballed from there. From that year to the following year, our revenue went up tenfold. And then the year after, it went up 4 times. And it just sort of gave us a business that we could never have imagined when we were there I was applying for jobs with Australia Post to deliver mail. Like it was grim.
It's hard to imagine you being in that position just 5 or 6 years ago, and to now see where you've been able to grow and evolve the business and the impact that you've made and the team that you've established. Like, that is a significant change and turnaround in circumstances. And the feeling and the theme that I'm sort of picking up through what you're sharing is that there's a lot of trust that's happened before any of the evidence actually showing up. Where do you feel like that trust and that conviction really came from?
I think as a founder, you either have it or you don't. You can't come at anything at half measures. And the other thing is you need to be able to make high conviction decisions. They're not always right. Like, I've stuffed up far more things than I've ever got correct, but it's the ability to make a decision quickly and to act on instinct. And that's just what we do. As I said, I've made so many dud calls, and you over litigate after the fact and you think, did I make the right decision? Did I not? But at the end of the day, if I would have had my time again, I would have made all those mistakes over again, because at the time I thought it was the right thing. So, I see a lot of people who over glorify this concept of being a founder or being self-employed. It's not for everybody, and you have to make unpalatable decisions and lots of decisions, like all the time. And it's just something, I believe it's something you either have or you don't. You just got to make a call and you just got to have courage of your conviction. And I think the other part was, I came to a realization early on that no one was going to come and save me. It was never going to be that, like, I wasn't hanging out for the next contract win. I wasn't hanging out for some investor that was going to come in and take all the pain away. In fact, the worst decisions I ever made were in order to take the pain away. Where it's really at is, no one's going to come save you. You can't go and outsource decision making. You have to make a call.
There's such powerful advice, and you can see that sometimes through that lived experience. You don't gain that wisdom or those lessons unless you go through some of those inevitable challenges that you are met with along the journey as a startup founder or as any leader, really. And on that point, I would really love to maybe touch on how your leadership journey has really evolved over time as well, because it's one thing working for an organization to then becoming a startup founder to then transcending into being the CEO. And I'm sure there's a lot of, growth lessons, wisdom, changes that you've had to take on in order to really step into this CEO position. I'm wondering if you could speak to some of that.
It wasn't a transition that I was particularly comfortable with. I always refer to myself as founder. It took a long time before I even put managing director on my email signature, because I had always thought like I was a founder, and that's, there's something magical about being a founder because it's the only permanent title. You can't be hired as a founder. You can't be fired as a founder. Once you are a founder, you will always be a founder. And that's what I thought I was supposed to do. And there are a couple of people that have helped me immeasurably on this journey who have never asked for anything in return. Folks that have been in my industry that have built businesses that they've sold that are incredible companies, and I've been guided by them. But the best bit of, and not even advice, the realization, I went to one really accomplished CEO and I asked him, what does it actually take to be a CEO? And he said, you just sort of know what it is when you're looking at it. And the advice was, you have to lead by example, demonstrate the behavior that you want your team to actually have. And, it's hard for me because I'm always working. I don't want that for my team. But the thing that resonated is, you're a CEO when all that's left is the unpalatable decisions to make. That all the easy decisions have been devolved down to line management and to the rest of the team. And you're left making the calls, like to make somebody redundant, whether you buy this other business, whether you take on this liability in this contract. It's those unpalatable decisions that make its way only to your desk. Mm-hmm. One of the founders that's helped me immeasurably, I've called him in tears before and said, I don't know what to do. What am I supposed to do here? And he said, well, what's the problem? I don't like this. I don't like that. I don't like this. And he said, well, mate, you're the CEO. If you don't like something, you change it. No one teaches you how to be a CEO. And I don't know that I would have got this job if I applied for it. For all founders, they need to acknowledge that you're a shareholder, director, and an operator. And those are three very distinct roles that actually don't sit well together.
You're so right in that being the CEO is really, it is ultimately where the buck begins and ends, and you really do set the tone and the foundation of everything that you're doing. You're setting the direction and the strategy and the vision of where you want to move your people towards. But then there are sometimes those conflicting roles and responsibilities that you do where as a CEO and as a founder, they're not necessarily the same role as you've touched on. So I'm wondering, how did you learn when to wear these different hats and when?
Well, it sort of starts with a general dose of humility. I introduce myself and when I speak at conferences or roundtables or whatever, I introduce myself as the founder and self-appointed CEO of Yellow Canary. And so, you got to be able to have a laugh at yourself and not take yourself too seriously. But no, the best advice was modeling behaviors and just treating people with respect and with dignity, but understanding that you aren't there to make friends and you interact with people very differently. What I did was I looked at things that I'd really shanked, like the things that I'd gotten really wrong, and thought, what lens was I looking through at the time?
You've obviously had your startup phase, and now you've received funding, you've grown your business, you've expanded, you've made quite the mark for yourself in this industry. How did you go about building your team and building the culture that then supports the system, the structure, and the work that you're bringing forth to your clients?
I think your early hires really set the tone for how the business is going to go. I think, look, when you're 10 employees, you can all sit around a table together and you can have, you can meet every single day. And then you get to 30 employees, it's a little bit harder. And then once we got to 50, it was even harder. And once we got to 80, it was almost impossible. Structure follows strategy. So we had to articulate what our strategy was, even though it was all in my head. That wasn't good enough. I had to put it on a piece of paper. Then we had to build an operating structure off the back of that. And then we had to hire people to operate within that structure to deliver that strategy. But the biggest mistake we made was because we grew so quickly. We went into the 4-month Sydney COVID lockdown with 12 people, I think, and we came out with 36. Market was awash with money. People were getting hired and poached left, right, and center. We were so desperate for people. We'd put a job ad up. We'd get 5 candidates that were all suboptimal, and we just picked the least worst candidate, and then we'd wonder why it all went wrong 3 or 4 months later. We just needed humans badly, because as I said, like our revenue went up 10-fold and then 4-fold after that, and we were too slow to offboard employees that weren't working out. You want to do right by people, and sometimes you get the view that you can't fire somebody, you can't offboard an employee, when it's actually, it serves no one's interest. They're not going to continue on. They're not performing up to what the standard that you need. They may not even be the right person for the business.
And sometimes it's delaying the inevitable as well, that actually letting them know and having those honest conversations could move them quicker into the right direction and allow you the freedom and flexibility to hire the right person.
We didn't have HR. We didn't have a CPO. We've got a fractional CPO now, but it was just the two of us trying to work out what the right thing was to do. And it was, a software engineer and a long-lapsed corporate advisor trying to work out how to run a business with 40 people.
And so for CEOs and leaders that are listening to this now and you sharing this experience of being so stretched and being so under-resourced, what are some of the wisdom or lessons that you could share with other leaders who may find themselves in a similar circumstance?
I almost feel like I'm not qualified to give other leaders advice, but I think, having the gut feel and actually doing things that intuitively feel right is a really important one, but never compromising quality. One of the best bits of advice that I got was, do you believe in the 80-20 principle? And I said, yes. He said, if you did an exam at uni or at school and you got 85%, would you be happy with that? Yeah, I would. Okay, cool. What that means is you can get all your work done in 2 days of the week, right? Again, playing out just the mathematics. And that leaves 3 days of the week to look after your people and dream big. And even though it doesn't quite work like that, there was a really good construct to focus on what matters, getting the most out of the people, but also like we saw a gap in the market. We built something that didn't exist before we started building it, but that means we don't rest on our laurels. Like I'm thinking about how sentient AI and humans are going to interact in the workforce, and what does the compliance environment look for those people, and how are we going to build product to ensure that compliance? You've got to really look way, way, way over the horizon and look at where you're going.
You touched on something around AI, and I do want to go there because this is a conversation that is very much front and center. We're having a lot of conversations right now on the show, outside of the show, around the role of AI in the workplace. AI is something that, a few years ago sounded like an aspirational construct or something so far into the future, and now it's real. It's here. It's something that businesses are finding that they're having to really look at and see how they want to best integrate and harness the power of AI. I'm curious if you could share what that looks like at Yellow Canary and some of the principles, the thinking that you've implemented and are starting to think about into the future as well.
Yeah, of course. Get the reps in. That's the advice I give everybody. It's really easy to say, oh, the large language models are inaccurate, they hallucinate, all this sort of stuff. They get better and better and better every single day. And so it's not like you can just rock up at Kona and be like, all right, I'm ready to do the Hawaiian Ironman. Have you trained? No. But how hard could it be to ride a bicycle, run and swim? Like, surely it's easy, right? It's only 250 Ks. My philosophy is get the reps in. So we try and embed AI in everything that we do, but with some serious guardrails. So the first one is we will not compromise the integrity of a wage calculation. We calculate an employee's entitlement to 6 decimal places of accuracy. The LLMs aren't capable of doing that yet, so we won't use AI for that. And also, when we do use AI within our platform, it's always in reference mode, so we're not using client data to train models. But then all of the surrounding, like Vanessa Lee, who's our senior marketing manager, I set her a task of getting output from a team of 5 with just herself. And we have to use AI for everything there. So we've done it. We're getting the reps in. We're using it every day, but we're using it on things that aren't mission critical. So like if it does a first cut of a press release or a LinkedIn post or something like that, and it's not quite right, we still have the human in the loop to make the amendments, but oftentimes it's just getting the first draft out. So yeah, we look at it on 2 planes. We have what's sitting within our system, which is heavily guardrailed, but works really well to deliver reporting and insights. Actually creating something, that's the generative part, which a lot of people have lost. They confuse automation with generative AI. But then on the enabler side, it's embedded in everything. We're using it every single day, multiple times a day, multiple things across the entire business.
I wanted to touch on this piece around compliance because compliance can be one of those topics that people find is very dry. They find it quite boring. It can sometimes even be an afterthought because it's not as exciting as some of the other more glamorous parts of business. But you bring a different perspective and lens to compliance. And I've heard you speak about this concept of compliance increasing things like trust and credibility and clarity and things of that nature. What's your take on compliance now, being in the business, leading Yellow Canary to the degree that you have? How have you really seen the relationship with compliance play out in a more favorable way that doesn't have to be so dry?
Well, it's still pretty dry, but I think like if you step through in our domain in payroll compliance, you can't claim to be an employer of choice if you don't pay your people correctly. Full stop. As an employer, you only have 2 responsibilities when it comes to your staff. You got to keep them safe physically and psychosocially, and you got to pay them correctly. And that's it. The thing about compliance is it's not optional. You don't really say, oh, I don't really feel like paying income tax this year, so I might just skip it. It's very early days when we're talking about payroll compliance. So I think, you need to build a bedrock of trust and transparency with your people by paying them correctly. And when they ask you, how do you know that I've been paid correctly? You've got to be able to answer that question. And you can't just say we pay above award or we pay a rolled up rate or something like that. It's the, show me, don't tell me.
In hearing what you just shared as well, by having these solid foundations that you're building your business from, it's the thing that often enables you to go and do the fun things or do the more exciting things, but from a place where you don't have to worry about, who's going to find out, or what if we reveal the veil, and we're worried about what we're going to find underneath there. And I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning of this episode, which was there was a time where not being forthcoming and pleading ignorance was a strategy that people could sort of take on. And now you're not going to be able to get away with that. It's an inevitability that the truth will always reveal itself. And so why not lay those foundations now so that you can build for longevity?
We look after some of the most vulnerable workers in the economy where not getting paid a meal allowance could be the difference between sending a child on a school excursion and not. So again, there's just this fundamental decency that you will pay people in accordance with their entitlements. We don't work with employers who genuinely want to do the wrong thing. All of the employers that we work with just want to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to overpay. They don't want to underpay. They just want to pay people in accordance with their entitlements and to build that bedrock of trust. Because again, oftentimes I see these headlines, and I've sat through meetings before where people have lost sight of the fact that there is a human being on the end of every payslip. They rely on that income to fund their entire life. And so I think, again, you look at compliance being dry, but because you've lost sight of the humans.
It's such an important message. So at CEO Behind the Scenes, we end all of our episode with the same 2 questions. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, what is one thing you've changed your mind about recently and why?
Oh, HR. Yeah. As a founder, you always say ridiculous stuff like, I'll never need an HR department. I don't want to do trust falls and, organizing Christmas parties and all that other ignorant.
The fluffy HR stuff.
Yeah. I don't need a cuddle. Like we need to sell stuff. So we didn't have HR. So getting HR, if I had my time again, a senior HR person would probably be my 3rd or 4th hire, because you get to set the path forward. So yeah, I've changed my mind about HR.
Okay, well, that's music to my ears with the background that I have. So that is great to hear that. And the second question is, what's one thing that you haven't changed your mind about, a belief that you want to share to help others lead or live better?
Personal health and fitness is not negotiable. I've always I've used the analogy of the Formula One race car driver being the fittest people on the planet, even though they just sit in a chair for work, but they've got to, absorb a lot of stress. So I train early in the morning because that's the only time I have that I know that I'm going to be uninterrupted. But the other thing is just being absolutely solid on your vision and where you actually want to take it, and not listening to the cabal of fee gouging experts that can come and give you advice but don't have accountability. At the end of the day, like, getting good advice for certain things is really important, but when it comes to strategy and product market fit, that is something that only a founder can do if you're in a founder-led organization, and that should never be outsourced. I will die on that hill.
Brilliant advice. Well, Marcus, I've absolutely loved having this conversation with you. It has been so great to hear about everything. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, from early startup chaos to compliance to building conviction to leadership to AI. There's been so much ground that we've covered in this conversation, and I've found it so inspiring for myself and for our audience. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Lara.
And thank you so much to our audience for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, then please be sure to subscribe, rate and review, and share this with someone who would really value and benefit from listening to Marcus's insights and wisdom that he has shared with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time on CEO Behind the Scenes.